Hello everybody, happy Saturday afternoon, hope yours is going well. We've got another Seahawks video to get to today, but first we are at 2,510 subscribers to the YouTube channel, still hasn't updated here. Shout out to all the subscribers, and as always, special tip of the cap goes to the channel members, especially elite channel members, Y2KHA, Brendon, Mikel, Scott, Todd, Hasher for MVP, VGK Tiger 75, Salacious, Crumb, Ryguy, and Brendan Nelson's haircut. Alright, so we've successfully gone through all the full-time or most of the time starters who are up for a new deal this upcoming offseason. And I think we've done a pretty good job of zooming in on where their deals may fall. So now that we've concluded that, we're going to loop back around and take a look at some of the players who are either part-time starters or just provide depth. And while these players aren't as interesting, they're more replaceable, and it's not that big of a deal if we keep any of them, really. They're still going to demand more than a minimum contract. They're still going to command probably at least a few $1,000,000 a year, and it's worth talking about because while they are replaceable, that doesn't mean you can just replace them with anybody. These players are good to have around. So we're going to go ahead and go back to the offense and work our way through. So today we're going to start with Carlos Hyde, and this is going to be somewhat difficult because the ways in which running backs are paid in this day and age tends to be a little nebulous. It's a combination of your production plus your age, and it can be kind of hard to work out the exact formula. And also, I expect players like Carlos Hyde to get hit very hard by the salary cap going down this year. So a player like Carlos Hyde is probably going to earn a lot less money than he did last year or even 2 years ago. So with that all in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at Carlos Hyde. So last year he played in 10 games, started one of them, and had a pretty decent year for a backup running back. He had 450 yards from scrimmage, 4 touchdowns. He had 1 fumble that I really don't think was his fault. Mostly, he was a ground and pound guy. Most of his yards came on the ground. He contributed less than 100 yards receiving. But he was reasonably efficient, 4.4 yards per carry. And it was a reasonably solid year for a second-string running back who occasionally had to fill in for the injured starter. So those are the raw numbers. And if you take a look at his PFF grade from 2020, we have 68.1, which is quite strong. So yeah, Carlos Hyde, reasonably productive, reasonably efficient in 2020, but not big numbers. And with that in mind, let's go ahead and dive in and try to figure out what kind of contract he might earn in free agency with a year like this. Keeping in mind that he will be 31 this year, and the fact that he does have an established history of being able to produce 1,000-yard seasons. All right, so you guys may remember several months ago when I dove into Chris Carson's future contract, I did go through some of the larger running back contracts in the NFL. So we're going to be skipping past those for the sake of this comparison because obviously I don't need to tell you why Carlos Hyde is not going to earn, $9 million a year, $8 million a year. That's not. If he does, it's not going to be here. It's going to be some other stupid team that doesn't know what they're doing. So we're going to skip all the way down to the 16th highest paid running back on a per year basis, which is also the first running back on the list to be earning less than $5 million a year. It's impossible for me to believe that Carlos Hyde will earn more than $5 million a year. And if he does, I have to believe it'll be somewhere else. So we're going to start with number 16, Giovanni Bernard of the Bengals, who signed a free agency deal in 2019 to stay with the Bengals, earning just under $5 million a year. So what he did in 2018 dictated this contract. So let's take a look at Giovanni Bernard's 2018. He was mostly used as a receiving back. He had 200 yards on the ground and 200 yards through the air. He had 3 touchdowns. He had a moderate efficiency of 4.7 yards per touch. And yeah, it's actually very similar in terms of the raw production to what Carlos Hyde did last year. And if you take a look at his PFF grade from 2018, it's identical to Carlos Hyde. So I think we might be onto something already. The only difference, the only big difference, is that when Carlos Hyde signed this contract, he was turning 28. So that probably indicates why Giovanni Bernard got a little more money in 2019 than Carlos Hyde can expect to get in 2021. So let's go ahead and keep going and jump down to the next player on our list, Tevin Coleman, who signed a 2-year deal worth $4.25 million a year in the same offseason that Giovanni Bernard did. So Tevin Coleman signed with the 49ers. Let's take a look at what he did in 2018 to earn that contract. He actually did quite a bit. He had 800 yards on the ground, almost 300 yards receiving, so he had a 1,000-yard season with 9 touchdowns, and he was only 26 going into the 2019 season. So this is actually kind of interesting. I believe the reason why Tevin Coleman may have ended up with such a weak contract with the Niners in 2019 was simply because his history of concussions. But it's a little bit odd that a player this productive and this reasonably aged would command a relatively small free agency deal. You would, especially when he moves to a different team, you would expect there to just be a little bit more money involved. His PFF grade from 2018 was pretty good, 65.7. So this is actually kind of an interesting, I don't know if you would call it an aberration, but it certainly seems to be a little odd that a player this productive would only get a deal that is not even $9 million over 2 years. So let's put this in our back pocket, keep it in mind as we go forward, and scroll down the list a little bit past a couple of guys. Let's take a look at Jalen Richard, or Jalen Richard. I don't know how they pronounce it over in LA, but he signed a 2-year deal worth $7 million, so $3.5 million a year with the Raiders after the 2019 season. So we've gone down a tier in terms of pay, and let's take a look at what Jalen Richard, or Jalen Richard, well, let's pick one right now. Jalen Richard. Let's go with Richard. I like Richard better. Let's see what he did in 2019 to earn it. He had about 150 rushing yards and 320 receiving yards. So he was mostly used as a receiving back. He was, in fact, I think he had as many receptions as he did rushing carries in 2019. So in terms of production, very similar to Carlos Hyde. They both ended up with just under 500 yards from scrimmage on the year. No touchdowns, which is notable, but similar stuff here. And his PFF grade for 2019 was 66.1. So Jalen Richard, decent comparison for Carlos Hyde, really. So I think we're still in the rough area of what we can expect. And just to add this in as well, going into the 2020 season, Richard was 27. All right, so let's keep going. Let's keep trying to find guys who are reasonable comps. Let's scroll down a little bit and take a look at Mike Davis. We remember Mike Davis. We know what he did for us in 2018 that earned him a 2-year, $6 million deal with the Panthers, $3 million a year. Let's take a look at Mike Davis's 2018. We kind of know, but he was very productive. He had over 700 yards from scrimmage, 5 touchdowns, 4.6 yards a carry, solid. And yeah, this is a rich man's version of what Carlos Hyde did in 2020, more or less. So once again, we're seeing another player who was productive and young, but still only got $3 million a year. This is why I say that running back contracts are often a little enigma-ish, I guess you could call it. So Carlos Hyde had a PFF grade in 2018 of 75.1. So in terms of the production, in terms of the level of pay that you would expect a player to earn based off their play, we're actually not really there yet. I think we're still kind of searching for the right Carlos Hyde comp. So let's keep going down the list, and let's take a look at one last player here, because after Rex Burkhead here, who signed a 1-year, $3 million deal with New England, you kind of start getting into the rookies, guys who are on, you know, scaled contracts, and that's not all that useful. So Rex Burkhead is going to be our stopping point, and we're going to see what we can learn from his play that led to this deal of 1 year, $3 million. Rex Burkhead in 2019 had 300 rushing yards, almost 300 receiving yards, so 581 yards. He was pretty efficient. He scored 3 touchdowns. Pretty nice year from him. A little bit better than what we saw from Hyde in 2020, but very similar in terms of overall play. And his PFF grade from 2019 was actually 70.2, which is quite good. So, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff to decipher here when you're trying to determine Carlos Hyde's worth. But when you take in the fact that he wasn't that productive in 2020, plus the fact that he's old. He's older than every player we just looked at here. Plus the fact that the cap is going down. I think that Carlos Hyde may very well settle for a much cheaper deal in 2021. So after taking a look at these deals and taking a look at the production that it took to get these deals, I would say that Carlos Hyde may very well sign for something like 1 year, $2.5 million. Maybe even 1 year, $2 million. And I don't think there will be any need to give him a longer-term deal than that. I don't think there will be a lot of desire in the organization to do that. So I'm going to say Carlos Hyde ends up getting a 1 year, $2 to $2.5 million deal. I don't know if it'll be with this team. If it's not, he's easy to replace, but he's also a pretty decent player, so I wouldn't be opposed to it. And I think that's going to go ahead and take care of our look at Carlos Hyde and trying to determine what kind of deal he might get. Carlos Hyde is just the kind of player who's going to get killed by the cap going down. So, 1 year, $2.5 million at most, $2 million at the least. And that's my guess. Peace out. Go Hawks. See you guys in stream later today. And we're going to keep on chugging through these potential free agency contracts. And yeah, hope you learned something today.